November 21st, 2019, 3:15 in the afternoon. Peter Williamson, 39 years old from Salford, was driving home from the gym. He pulled up outside his luxury villa in the quiet resort town of Riviera del Sol on Spain's Costa del Sol. His UK-plated Audi barely had time to stop. A car appeared beside him. The gunman opened fire. 8 9mm bullets, one straight through his heart. He was dead before help could arrive. His mother witnessed everything. She screamed, tried to save him, but he was already gone. Two men from Greater Manchester, Aaron Asquith and Edward Taylor, had flown to Spain 10 days earlier. They rented a car, watched Williamson's villa, and waited for the perfect moment to strike. Spanish police called it a drug gang hit, a settling of scores between Salford rivals. The men were arrested in 2020, charged with murder, and later released on bail in 2023. As of today, they still haven't faced trial. They flew 1,000 miles to kill him, and they're still walking free. This is the story of Peter Williamson's double life, a man whose secret world would ultimately lead to his brutal assassination in broad daylight on a Spanish street, and of the two killers who tracked him across a continent and still haven't faced justice. But before we reveal who Peter Williamson really was, and why two men traveled 1,000 miles to execute him, if you're fascinated by international gangland killings and how UK gang warfare extends across Europe, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Because what happened on that Spanish street shows the deadly reach of British organized crime. Peter Williamson, the double life. Peter Andrew Williamson wasn't a stranger to Salford. Born and raised in Kersal, Greater Manchester, he was known locally by the nickname Snaggle. At 39 years old, he was married with children and had recently moved to Spain, settling in the quiet, upscale Riviera del Sol area of Mijas, part of the sun-soaked Costa del Sol. To those who knew him, Williamson appeared to be doing well, living the dream that so many British expats chase. He wore luxury watches, drove a sleek UK-plated Audi, dressed in designer brands, lived in a gated villa in one of the most desirable areas on the coast. To the outside world, he was the image of success, a devoted family man who'd made it abroad, who'd left behind the gray skies of Greater Manchester for Spanish sunshine and coastal living. However, Spanish investigators saw a very different picture, and their version told a much darker story. According to the Guardia Civil, Williamson wasn't just an ordinary expat enjoying retirement in the sun. They claimed he had numerous criminal records back in the United Kingdom, a history that stretched back years. Intelligence reports went even further, suggesting that Williamson was a significant player in Salford's ongoing gang war. The same brutal conflict that had already claimed the lives of notorious figures like Paul Massey in 2015 and John Kinsella in 2018. A war that had turned parts of Greater Manchester into a battlefield. Investigators believed Williamson had been living in Spain since 2015, but that his move wasn't just about the sunshine and sangria. They suspected he'd fallen out with a Manchester gang leader, a rift connected to the violent feud that had torn through Salford's underworld and left bodies in its wake. The theory was simple. Williamson had fled to Spain not for a better life, but for his life, trying to put distance between himself and enemies who wanted him dead. Then in March 2019, just months before his death, he was arrested by Spanish police, accused of shipping cannabis out of Malaga. Reports in national newspapers described him as a man with a long history of drug trafficking and links to a local cannabis social club operating in the area. The evidence suggested Williamson wasn't just hiding in Spain. He was working, building networks, moving product, staying active in the same criminal world he'd supposedly fled. But his family told a completely different story. To them, Williamson was a hard-working entrepreneur, a devoted father who'd built legitimate businesses, not a criminal, not a drug trafficker, just a successful businessman who'd made his money through hard work. They dismissed the allegations as nothing more than sensational rumors fueled by media outlets eager for scandal and headlines. The truth, however, lay somewhere in the middle, buried beneath a life where legitimate business and organized crime blurred into one, where someone could be both a loving father and a player in the drug game. where the line between legal and illegal became so thin it was almost invisible. And in that shadowy space where those two worlds collided, danger was never far behind. Because in the criminal underworld, your past doesn't just follow you, it hunts you. Costa del Sol, the killing ground. By 2019, the Costa del Sol had earned a grim reputation that stretched far beyond Spain's borders. It wasn't just a sun-soaked paradise for tourists and retirees anymore. It had transformed into something much darker. It had become a killing ground for British gangs settling scores far from home. That year, 2019, was the most violent in memory for the region. Over 20 murders were directly linked to drug and gang conflicts, and many of these killings were carried out in broad daylight with military-grade weapons. Execution-style hits that shocked even the most seasoned investigators. Foreign and domestic criminal organizations operated openly along the coastline, treating it like their personal territory. British gangs, Irish gangs, Eastern European networks, Moroccan traffickers, all competing for control of the lucrative drug routes flowing through southern Spain. The Spanish press warned repeatedly that fragmented criminal organizations were treating drug trafficking like a sophisticated logistics business, moving cocaine and cannabis with ruthless efficiency, using the Costa del Sol's infrastructure, its ports, its airports, its network of corrupt officials. When police pressure mounted in one area, the gangs didn't back down. They responded with tit-for-tat killings that escalated the violence to levels that shocked even experienced law enforcement. The violence wasn't hidden in back alleys or industrial estates. It was unfolding in broad daylight, in residential areas, near beaches where families sunbathed. Shootings erupted on streets where tourists walked, near restaurants where couples had dinner, in parking lots outside shopping centers, even in places where families walk their children to school. In February 2019, Marco Yacoub, a Marbella businessman, was executed in a drive-by shooting. His car was riddled with bullets as terrified onlookers watched in horror. The killers fled before police could respond. No arrests were made. Then just months later in December 2019, a French national was gunned down in another brazen attack, shot multiple times in a public area. The message was clear: nowhere was safe. The once glamorous Costa del Sol, known internationally for its pristine beaches, luxury villas, high-end restaurants, and vibrant nightlife, had transformed into a battleground. A place where million-pound properties stood next to crime scenes, where yacht parties happened alongside gang executions. And soon, Peter Williamson's name would be added to that growing list of casualties in Spain's escalating underworld war. But the men hunting him were already in position, watching, waiting, planning the perfect moment to strike. The hunters arrived November 11, 2019. November 11, 2019, two men from Salford boarded a flight from Manchester Airport to Barcelona. Aaron Asquith, age 25 years old, and Edward Taylor, 39 years old. To anyone watching them pass through security, they looked like ordinary travelers, maybe heading to Spain for a week in the sun. A lad's holiday, some time away from the Manchester weather. But this wasn't a holiday. This was a mission, and these men had one clear objective. After landing in Barcelona, the pair made their way to a car rental dealership in Vilafranca. Using a fake ID, they picked up a white Opel Corsa. Nothing flashy, nothing that would attract attention. Just a standard rental car that would blend into Spanish traffic. From there, they began the long drive south, nearly 1,000 kilometers from Barcelona to Mijas, the quiet coastal town near Malaga, where Peter Williamson had made his home with his family. The journey would have taken them roughly 10 hours, driving down Spain's eastern coast, through Valencia, past Alicante, eventually reaching Andalusia and the Costa del Sol. And when they arrived in Mijas, they didn't rush. They weren't amateurs. They were professionals executing a carefully planned operation. For days they waited, watching Williamson's villa, studying his every move, learning his patterns, his routines, his habits. Spanish investigators would later confirm through surveillance footage and witness statements that Asquith and Taylor had been conducting extensive surveillance of Williamson's residence. They were carefully documenting his daily routines with methodical precision. When did he leave the house? What time did he return? Which route did he take to the gym? Where did he park his car? At what moments was he most vulnerable, most exposed, most isolated? They watched everything, noted everything, planned for every possibility. They were patient, professional, deadly. And on November 21st, 2019, exactly 10 days after arriving in Spain, they put their plan into action. The execution, November 21st, 2019. November 21st, 2019, a Thursday afternoon, the kind of day that makes people love the Costa del Sol. Clear blue skies, warm sunshine, a gentle breeze coming off the Mediterranean. Around 3:15 p.m., Peter Williamson had just finished his workout at the gym, a normal part of his routine. He climbed into his UK-plated Audi, probably thinking about dinner plans or what he'd do with his evening. The sun was shining over Riviera del Sol. The streets were quiet, almost serene. Just another peaceful afternoon in paradise. Williamson drove through the streets of Mijas, heading home to his villa. Nothing unusual, nothing that would have raised any alarms in his mind. He pulled up outside his property on Calafabray, near the AP7 motorway toll booth, a familiar routine he'd done countless times. Park the car, walk to the door, another day done. As he began to maneuver the Audi into his parking spot, preparing to step out, a car suddenly appeared beside him, pulling up close. Too close. The gunman didn't hesitate, didn't give Williamson a chance to react, didn't give him a moment to understand what was happening. They opened fire at point-blank range through the driver's side window, bullets ripping through the glass, the sound of gunfire shattering the quiet afternoon. 7 shots struck Williamson's body, each one finding its target, but it was the 8th bullet that killed him, the one that pierced his heart, the one that ended his life instantly. Peter Williamson was dead before he could even process what was happening, before he could call for help, before he could fight back. Neighbors living nearby heard the unmistakable crack of gunfire. They rushed outside, not knowing what they'd find. The scene that greeted them was chaos. Emergency responders arrived within minutes. Police, paramedics, all converging on the quiet residential street that had just become a murder scene. Williamson's mother was there. She'd been at the villa. She'd heard the shots. She'd run outside and found her son slumped in the driver's seat. Blood everywhere. She screamed. She tried to save him. She performed CPR desperately, frantically, hoping against hope that she could bring him back. But there was nothing anyone could do. Peter Williamson was gone. His body lay in the street, later covered by a forensic sheet, as investigative teams combed the scene for clues. Shell casings, bullet trajectories, any evidence that might lead them to the killers. No weapon was recovered at the scene. The killers had taken it with them. They'd vanished into the maze of coastal roads, disappearing into the network of highways and side streets before police could set up roadblocks. All they left behind was a trail of shock, terror, and a grieving mother kneeling beside her dead son. A brutal execution, carried out with chilling precision, professional, cold, calculated. But who were these killers? And why did they want Williamson dead? A son executed while his mother watched. Killers who flew 1,000 miles to pull the trigger, and a gang war that knew no borders or boundaries. The investigation and arrests, Spanish and UK authorities launched a joint cross-border investigation immediately after Williamson's killing. This wasn't just a local murder. This was international organized crime. A British citizen killed on Spanish soil by British suspects. Investigators quickly determined that Williamson had been tracked and ambushed. His murder wasn't random. It wasn't a robbery gone wrong. This was a targeted hit tied to a larger criminal conflict that stretched all the way from Greater Manchester to the Spanish coast. By May 2020, roughly 6 months after the murder, the investigation had identified 2 suspects through a combination of CCTV footage, phone records, witness statements, and intelligence sharing between British and Spanish law enforcement. Aaron Asquith and Edward Taylor, both from Salford, both with connections to Manchester's criminal underworld. Police described them as members of what they called an important criminal organization dedicated to marijuana distribution. Not small-time dealers, but significant players in a sophisticated operation moving drugs across international borders. The investigation revealed that after Williamson's murder, Asquith hadn't returned immediately to the UK. Instead, he'd traveled across Europe and South America, moving between countries, staying mobile, avoiding detection. He eventually returned to Spain just before the COVID-19 lockdown shut down international travel in March 2020, and that's when investigators finally caught up with him. When officers raided the villa where Asquith was staying on the Costa del Sol, they discovered 20 kilograms of vacuum-packed cannabis, high-quality product allegedly meant for trafficking, evidence that he was still actively involved in the drug trade, even while evading capture for murder. Edward Taylor's arrest happened differently. He was detained in the UK. In mid-May 2020, Taylor flew home from Malaga to Manchester. As soon as he landed and passed through immigration, police were waiting. He was arrested on arrival for breaching a house arrest order completely unrelated to Williamson's murder. But once he was in custody, Spanish authorities moved quickly. They issued a European arrest warrant charging him with Williamson's murder. Taylor was extradited to Spain to face charges. By summer 2020, both men were formally charged with murder. The Spanish investigation had built what prosecutors believed was a solid case. Investigators indicated publicly that a dispute between rival drug trafficking organizations was the primary motive for the killing, that the suspects were part of a Salford-based criminal network, and that Williamson's murder was a revenge strike in a broader gang feud that had been playing out for years, a deadly clash between criminal organizations operating across international borders. Manchester gang warfare exported to Spanish Sunshine. Justice seemed certain. The suspects were in custody. The evidence was being gathered. A trial was inevitable, until it wasn't. The bail release and delayed justice. After nearly 3 years sitting in Spanish custody awaiting trial, a Spanish court made a decision that shocked many following the case. In April 2023, the court granted both Aaron Asquith and Edward Taylor bail. Each man was released on $20,000 bail, subject to what were described as strict conditions. They were required to surrender their passports to authorities. They had to check in with Spanish officials twice every month to confirm they hadn't fled. They were ordered to remain in Spain pending trial. Their defense lawyers had argued successfully that the case was still dragging through the investigation phase, that such lengthy pretrial detention without a trial date being set had become unreasonable under Spanish law, that their clients deserved the presumption of innocence while awaiting their day in court. The court agreed with the defense arguments, and just like that, 2 men accused of flying 1,000 miles to execute someone walked out of Spanish custody. Now, as of late 2025, the case remains completely unresolved. No trial outcome has been made public. No verdict has been announced. No justice has been delivered for Peter Williamson or his family. Both Asquith and Taylor continue to await further hearings in the Spanish court system, still technically charged with murder, still technically facing life imprisonment if convicted, but free to walk the streets while the legal process continues at a glacial pace. Despite their release on bail, Spanish authorities still consider both suspects dangerous. The investigation technically continues, evidence is still being compiled, witnesses are still being interviewed, but justice for Peter Williamson remains elusive, hanging in the balance as the Spanish legal process drags on year after year. His family waits. His mother, who watched him die, waits. And his killers walk free. 6 years after the murder, the alleged killers walk free on bail. The family still waits for justice. The double-edged sword. The story of Peter Williamson reflects both sides of the drug world, the allure and the danger that come packaged together. It's a world where quick money and high stakes collide constantly. It's a world where fortune favors the ruthless, where loyalty is conditional, where trust is rare, and where one wrong move, one bad decision, one crossed line can cost you absolutely everything. Peter Williamson was a prime example of this double-edged sword. He'd built systems and networks in the UK that made him wealthy, made him successful by criminal standards. He was moving product, making connections, generating serious money. Then he relocated to Spain, settled into a luxury villa, tried to keep a low profile while still maintaining his operations. On the surface, his strategy seemed to work. He looked like a man who'd successfully escaped the chaos of Manchester's gang wars. Living under the Spanish sun, surrounded by luxury, A gated villa, a nice car, designer clothes, all the trappings of success. But in the world he moved in the circles he operated within, peace never lasts. The battle for control never ends. The fight for dominance, for territory, for respect is constant and unrelenting. And in that kind of business, enemies don't forget. Rivals don't forgive. Debts get settled. Scores get evened. No matter how long it takes. In Williamson's case, his rivals flew 1,000 miles just to find him, rented a car, watched his villa for 10 days, then executed him in broad daylight on a quiet Spanish street. A brutal reminder that no matter how far you run, no matter how much distance you put between yourself and your past, it always finds a way to catch up. The drug world offers wealth and status, but it demands everything in return. Your freedom, your safety, and often, your life. Closing 7 shots fired at point-blank range through a car window. The 8th bullet piercing his heart. His mother watching from her son's villa. Emergency responders arriving too late to help. 2 men from Salford who tracked Peter Williamson across a continent. Who waited 10 days for the perfect moment. Who executed their mission with military precision on a Thursday afternoon in the Spanish sunshine. And 6 years later, justice remains unserved. The suspects were released on bail in April 2023. The trial has been delayed indefinitely. The Spanish legal system continues to grind forward at its own pace, while Williamson's family waits for answers and closure. Peter Williamson, nicknamed Snaggle from Kersal, Greater Manchester, lies buried while the men accused of killing him walk free on Spanish streets. The Costa del Sol killing ground continues to operate. British gang warfare continues to be exported to Spanish sunshine. Luxury villas continue to hide deadly feuds and violent rivalries. And the message from this case is clear. The reach of British organized crime extends far beyond UK borders. Salford gang wars play out on Spanish streets. Manchester feuds end with executions near Mediterranean beaches. If this story showed you the international reach of UK gang warfare and how justice can be delayed for years, hit that like button right now. Subscribe to Dark Truth Files for more investigations into organized crime, gangland killings, and the dark side of the drug trade. Drop a comment sharing your thoughts on international gang violence and delayed justice. Share this video with the true crime community who needs to understand how British criminal networks operate across Europe. Because Aaron Aswith and Edward Taylor flew 1,000 miles to execute Peter Williamson. They watched his villa for 10 days. They waited for the perfect moment. They fired 8 bullets. His mother watched him die. And 6 years later, they're still free on bail. Still haven't faced trial. Still haven't been convicted. That's not justice. That's the reality of how gang warfare operates across international borders. And Peter Williamson paid the ultimate price while his alleged killers wait for a trial that may never come.